Draco and the Letter from the Future. By Draco, we'll hear about this. Chapter 4. About friendship and enmity. Due to Harry's lack of punishment following the events of their first flying lesson, Nott became even more vicious than before. Not only did he bully his victims more and more publicly, but he also widened his fields of victims. Among it were now, apart from Draco and Longbottom, Harry and Weasley, and depending on his mood, every Gryffindor student he came across. Draco, though, was still his favorite punchball. In the following week, Draco found all his school books drenched by a sticky green fluid that smelled strongly of rotten eggs, his astronomy essay handed over to Millicent Bulstrode's cat to sharpen her claws with, and himself pushed down a set of stairs high enough that he ended up in the hospital wing overnight. Thankfully, McGonagall happened to walk in on that last one, and though he had been unconscious, he had heard from Harry afterwards that she had yelled at Nott, Crabbe, and Goyle for 10 minutes straight and given them detention for the rest of the month. Harry, needless to mention, was livid at Nott's recent behavior. He got into fights with him almost once a day, and whenever someone only uttered his name, Harry's green eyes would narrow and his fists clench. It all seemed to have escalated, though, on the night Draco had been hospitalized. Madame Pomfrey let him out of her care in time for breakfast, and when he hurried down the corridors towards the great hall, he almost collided with Harry. The other boy was alone for once without his usual red-headed shadow, and he was carrying a couple of sandwiches in his arms. "I was looking for you," Harry told him, his eyes bright as he pushed the food at him. "I have to talk to you. Alone." Draco was intrigued, but he gratefully accepted the offering and followed Harry out onto the grounds for a walk. Harry did not speak until they were safely out of everyone's earshot. "So, last night," Harry began, "Nott challenged me to a duel." Draco almost choked on his bite of bread. "What?" he asked, stunned. "I called him out because of his stunt with the stairs, and then he suddenly started babbling about wizarding duels, and asked me to meet him in the trophy room at midnight. I didn't really understand most of what he was saying, to be honest. Ron stepped in to handle the talking." "How kind of him," Draco commented, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You didn't go, did you? It was obviously a trap." When Harry looked embarrassed, Draco's eyes widened. "You didn't! Harry, what the—" "Ron had accepted before I even knew what was going on," Harry said defensively, "and then I couldn't back out." "Why, because Weasley said so?" Draco challenged. "Please tell me you didn't get caught like Nott so obviously intended you to." "We almost did," Harry muttered, his voice small. "But we escaped." "Brilliant!" Draco rolled his eyes. "Why didn't you tell me about this when you came to see me in the hospital wing last night? I would have told you not to go." Harry bit his lip. "Ron said—" "Oh, right!" Draco spat his temper, flaring up immediately. "Because Weasley is to be more trusted in knowing how Nott's mind works than I am!" "That's not what I was saying," Harry protested. "Why are you getting so worked up over this?" "Because, Harry," Draco snapped, "you should have come to me first! It's always Weasley, whether he is even qualified to give you advice on that particular matter or not! I always hear about everything last, and I'm sick of it!" "I didn't—" Harry began, gulping and frowning at him. "That's not—" "You know it is!" Draco insisted. "I don't know if it's because I'm not one of your beloved housemates, or because Weasley feeds you stories about my father—" "I don't care about any of that," Harry called. "You know that." "Then why am I always second best?" Draco demanded, an edge to his voice. Honestly, he didn't know why he was making a scene. Harry had been a good friend to him, and deep down he knew that the boy had just wanted to avenge him. But the jealousy towards Weasley had been there from the first day of school, bubbling inside of him like lava, and now it all just spilt over. "You could have gotten in serious trouble last night," Draco pointed out. "You could have been expelled, and it would have all been Weasley's fault for pushing you into it. But sure, keep confiding in him instead of me, why don't you?" And with that, Draco stormed off, leaving a shell-shocked Harry behind. Draco hid in the owlery for the rest of the day. He couldn't explain why he had chosen this particular place to sulk. It was dirty and windy, but Aquila let him pet his feathers and sat close to him, and somehow that made him feel a little calmer. After a while, Harry's snowy owl flew over to join them too. Maybe she recognized him as a friend of Harry's. Her big amber eyes were watching him curiously, as if she knew it was her owner that had made him upset. "I didn't want to fight with him," Draco whispered, sounding as miserable as he felt. "I just hate feeling so inconsequential next to Weasley." Hedwig hooted softly, as if acknowledging his words. "What's so great about that freckled git?" Draco muttered. "What does he have that I don't?" Hedwig just tipped her head to the side. Aquila hooted from next to him, fluttering until he landed on his shoulder, gently nipping at his hair. It was at that moment that Harry burst through the door. He was out of breath and looked around frantically until he spotted Draco sitting on a bench, surrounded by their owls. Hedwig let out a high-pitched screech and flew over to him. Harry held out his hand for her to land on, petting her head absent-mindedly. He was staring at Draco, though. "Fred and George told me they'd seen you up here," he answered the unvoiced question hanging between them. "I've been looking for you all day." "Is that so?" Draco drawled, looking at Hedwig instead of Harry. Draco wasn't good at this. Apologies. Rejection. Not getting exactly what he wanted. It was Harry, though, who took over for him, much to his surprise. "I'm sorry, Draco," he said quite urgently. "I didn't mean to upset you or make you think that I trust you less than Ron. I was angry at Nott, and you were still pretty out of it at the hospital last night, and I guess I didn't want to worry you." There was a slight intake of breath before he muttered, "I'm really sorry." Draco met Harry's eyes then and saw fear in those startling green orbs. It was then that Draco remembered that Harry had never had real friends until Hogwarts either, that he was as new to all of this as Draco was, and more importantly, that he was probably just as scared of all of it disappearing again. "I hate when you tell Weasley things before you tell me," Draco pointed out, because he was a Malfoy, and it was in his nature to always want to have the last word. "I know it can't be helped sometimes. We don't share a common room, and are separated from most of our classes. But you're my only friend, and I don't want to be second best to you." "You aren't," Harry shook his head. "You are just as important to me as Ron is, and I promise I'll tell you everything immediately from now on." Draco let go of a breath he had not known he was holding, warmth spreading through him at those words. Finally he nodded. "Okay," he muttered. "I'm sorry, too, for making a scene." Harry smiled tentatively, and he crossed the distance between them, sitting next to Draco on the bench. He ran his fingers through Hedwig's feathers affectionately, and she closed her eyes, looking content. "Are we okay, then?" Harry asked at last, and when Draco nodded, he added, "Can I now tell you what I really wanted to tell you this morning?" Draco smiled, and Aquila hooted softly from his place on Draco's shoulder. "Sure," he agreed. Harry then dived into the story about how the previous night he and Weasley had stumbled over Longbottom and Granger, and how they had followed them, and how, when they had figured out that they had been tricked, they had accidentally fled into the forbidden third-floor corridor trying to escape Filch, and what they had found there. "A three-headed dog!" Draco hissed, whirling around to look at Harry so abruptly that Aquila complained with a loud screech and flew off towards the other end of the oval tower, glowering at Draco reproachfully from the shadows. Hedwig joined in, leaving Harry and Draco alone on the bench. "What the bloody hell would Dumbledore keep such a thing in a skull for?" "We think it's guarding whenever Hagrid got out of Gringotts the day of the break-in," Harry muttered. "Wow!" Draco shuddered. "It must be really valuable then, though I don't get why they think Hogwarts is safer than Gringotts. They have tons of stuff to guard it there. Why would a vicious dog with too many heads and a bunch of kids keep whoever is after it out when they took their chances with dragons and who knows what else?" "I don't know." Harry frowned, as if he hadn't thought about it that way. "Hagrid seems to reckon here's safer. Maybe it's because of Dumbledore?" He shrugged, then continued, "I really want to know what it is the dog is guarding, though." "Probably some kind of invaluable magical object," Draco mused. "Or something really dark. I heard stories about old artifacts that, if they ended up in the wrong hands—" He dived into a retelling of gruesome tales he had heard from his father, and the way Harry listened so intently and speculated with him until the sun was setting and they had to go back to the castle cheered Draco up immensely. He wished it could always be like this, he thought to himself. Just him and Harry, with the other boys' attention completely on him, and no Weasley around to ruin the day. Until Halloween, a strange new normality formed in Draco's life. Whenever it was not lesson or mealtime, he would stick to Harry, who would sometimes have Weasley in his tow, but would also meet him on his own increasingly often. It seemed to Draco like Weasley had grudgingly accepted that Harry's friendship to Draco was a thing now, and that he wasn't going anywhere, so he had decided to give them some space. This suited Draco quite well. The more time he got to spend alone with Harry, the easier it was for him to accept that Weasley was the one at his side through most other times of the day. Nott was still doing his best to abuse Draco verbally and, if he could get away with it, in every other imaginable way. But after Draco's injury, the teachers, especially Professor McGonagall, had started keeping a closer eye on them, so they had to be more careful. Hagrid, on his part, had gotten wind of the way his housemates treated Draco, and had gifted him a chest that would bite everyone but him who tried to reach inside, which had successfully kept his possessions out of Nott's grubby hands ever since. To say that the thoughtful gift had surprised Draco would be an understatement. He had warmed up to the giant gamekeeper so much he would accompany Harry to visit him almost at weekly intervals. As Halloween approached, the castle was decorated spectacularly, and despite the fact that he was seated among his fellow Slytherins, Draco was quite enjoying the feast that evening. Live bats were fluttering through the great hall, and giant pumpkins were festively hollowed and had had scary faces carved, illuminating the great hall with flickering candlelight. The feast was cut short, though, when suddenly Professor Quirrell, their defense against the dark arts teacher, burst into the great hall gasping about a troll in the dungeons. In an instant, every student was on their feet, and the panicked crowd was only to be reined in by Dumbledore himself, who ordered the prefects to take their houses back to their common rooms. Which technically wasn't a half-bad idea, Draco thought, if you forgot the fact that the Slytherin common room was located in the dungeons. Several of his housemates seemed to have come to the same conclusion, and there were vehement protests from various sides as their prefects tried to steer them out into the entrance hall and down the stairs. It was through this chaos that Draco spotted Harry and Weasley separating from their group of Gryffindors and running down another corridor, determined and quite unaccompanied. Draco had only a moment to blanch. Stupid, reckless, impossible Gryffindors! Before he was running after them, fully intending to pull them back by their robes if he had to. Harry! Draco called, and then looked over their shoulders as Draco approached. What in Merlin's name are you? Hermione! Harry called as if that should mean anything to Draco, but just as he had opened his mouth to snap back at the other boy, he added, She's in the bathroom, and she doesn't know. Then why didn't you tell the teacher? Draco demanded. Why did you have to... Oh, shut up, Malfoy! Weasley snapped. You're wasting all our breath. And with that, they turned back around and picked up speed, and Draco could do nothing but follow after them. This is stupid! Draco announced, because he could complain and run at the same time. Thank you very much. Why wasn't she at the feast to begin with? And why do you have to be her babysitter? If we come across that troll, I swear to Salazar! But Harry and Weasley had stopped in their tracks, and Harry had clasped a hand over Draco's mouth to shut him up. They slipped behind a large stone griffin, and finally, Draco saw the reason for their hold-up. Snape was crossing the corridors ahead of them in far steps, heading up a couple of stairs. For a moment, Draco considered fighting Harry off and calling out to him for help, but then he figured that they'd be in enormous trouble if Snape got them out alone like this against the headmaster's orders. He's heading for the 3rd floor, Harry hissed. What's he doing? Why isn't he down in the dungeons with the other teachers? Search me, Weasley muttered, and Draco finally succeeded in pushing Harry's hand from his face. He opened his mouth to say something scathing before holding in, frowning and wrinkling his nose. What's that smell? He inquired, causing Harry and Weasley to both sniff and make a face and turn. Then they heard heavy, shuffling footsteps from a corridor towards their left, and when they turned around to the corner to look, they spotted the giant monster that was inevitably going to haunt his nightmares from now on, scuffling along in the dark. Oh no, Draco breathed. I don't like this. Let's go back, please. Shut up, Weasley hissed, and Harry glanced his hand back over Draco's mouth so that he could only stare in armor as the thing moved along the corridor and disappeared into the open door. "The key's in the lock," Harry muttered. "We could lock it in." "Good idea," Ron said, and they had just begun to move toward the door when Draco grasped Harry's arm, holding him back. "Wait!" Draco hissed. "Didn't you say Granger was in the bathroom? This is the girls' bathroom, you morons!" The other two just stared at him for a moment, stunned. And then a high-pitched scream broke through the silence. "Hermione!" Harry and Weasley called and started running, Draco cursing his luck and his life choices, followed reluctantly. In hindsight, Draco did not remember how they had survived the whole thing. There was a lot of screaming and the troll smashing half the bathroom with his club, and at one point Harry had hung in the air. Somehow, though, Weasley had managed to knock the thing out with its own weapon due to some feebly cast spell, and Draco had just started to feel his legs again when the teachers had burst into the room. Draco had never been so sure of his own doom. He had already been wondering what his father would do to him if he got expelled within his first term, and if he'd be allowed to go to another school abroad. Maybe Beauxbatons. He spoke French after all. Or Durmstrang. His father had considered the school for him at some point, but he would have to learn German or Russian, and Draco did not fancy the declination of those two languages. Or maybe Ilvermorny. Though really, it sounded like a second class Hogwarts. Though, if he was expelled here, he might as well. And they spoke English, though sometimes it didn't sound like it. Quite surprisingly, though, his inner monologue had been interrupted by Hermione Granger, official know-it-all and goody-two-shoes of their year, a most annoying existence Draco had ever encountered, and that included some mad paintings in the West Wing of Malfoy Manor, who saved them from punishment by taking the blame on herself. "I went looking for the troll because I thought I could deal with it on my own, you know, because I read all about them," she lied, making Draco, Harry, and Weasley gape at her like she had just turned into a step-dancing Filch. "If they hadn't found me, I'd be dead now." It was the most bizarre thing Draco had ever experienced. The unconscious troll lying between them, drooling over the floor, as Granger told a straight-out lie to the teachers in an attempt to save their skin. Though Draco figured they had come to save hers in the first place, it was probably good manners to return the favor in a world that was not ruled by Slytherins. Maybe he would have to take notes. In the end, Draco, Harry, and Weasley each won points for their houses and were lectured about their sheer luck by Professor McGonagall, as if Draco needed to be reminded of how high the possibility of his death had been. And then they were released quite unharmed and still very much enrolled at the school. The strangest outcome of it all, though, was that from that point on, Granger joined their unlikely group whenever they hung out together, and by some weird agreement that probably had happened within the Gryffindor common room while he hadn't been around, they all became friends. Draco was not sure what exactly he felt about the fact that he had to count Weasley and Granger among his friends now, but he figured as long as Harry was there, he could deal with it.